You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ace, and with the support of the University of Alaska Fairbanks Department of Social Work, we gather voices of revolutionary social workers from around the world, organizers, healers, artists, and educators, people who carry stories that connect us, challenge us, and remind us what it means to be human. Each episode is an offering, a chance to slow down, listen deeply, and feel the ground beneath your feet. Come as you are, stay as long as you need, and remember, no matter your pain, somebody, somewhere feels the same. Welcome to The Circle. Episode 84 features Mark Tuggle, editor and author of Cultural Silence and Wounded Souls, where Black men speak plainly about mental health, cultural pressure, and the silence many are trained to carry. If you find something meaningful here, the best way that you can support this work is simple. Like, comment, share the episode, and subscribe to our channels. And if you want to connect, ask questions, or be a part of the conversation, please reach out, because I'd love to hear from you. All right. Welcome to another live recording of The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Christian A. Stetler, and I'm very honored to be joined by my good friend, Mark Tuggle, this morning/afternoon. How you doing today, Mark?
I'm in good spirits, Ace. Thank you for the opportunity to be in dialogue with you and the community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how I came across Mark, I think we connected on LinkedIn, but was through the book that you wrote some of it, wrote a chapter in here and have edited. It's called Cultural Silence and Wounded Souls. Black Men Speak About Mental Health. How did this book come about?
That book came about through my own lived experience, being diagnosed with mental illness 31 years ago, and feeling frightened, confused, invisible, uncomfortable, sad, not knowing where my life was headed. And 3 months prior to that, I was diagnosed HIV positive. So I was obsessed with death, like Biggie and Tupac. And that's all I could think about for months was dying. But a friend suggested that I see a therapist, which I did for several years. I started joining support groups and started to write, journal, and become more creative. About 5, 6 years ago, I got put it on my spirit to write a anthology. So that book is, it comes from lived experience, but also comes from the inspiration I've gotten from other people who've been very honest and transparent, vulnerable about their own lived experience. And just my work around mental health, mental illness, self-care, etc.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think the book has a couple different maybe grand thesis or ideas. And I think the title says it all, the cultural silence and wounded souls. And maybe we can talk about what that means. But in the end, you write the forwarding essay in here. It tells some of the stuff you just talked about, a little bit of your story in here, but you close it off by saying, quote, "If the collective consciousness of this content prevents one Black male suicide, our pain will not be in vain." And what comes to me when I read that is when you think about suicide, some of the highest rates of suicide might be in the military or amongst Black males. And I think a culture that you find in both of those places, both of those realms, is that sense of silence where folks are kind of encouraged not to talk about it, or the consequences of talking about it, people might not be willing to endure. I was wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit.
No, you're right. My younger brother's in the military, Master Sergeant for 25 years. But he shared some of his own journey with mental health and the silence, the culture, the whole ideas around manhood and masculinity in the military, and the mask that a lot of guys wear. They don't talk about or express, their distress, their well-being. So just growing up in Chicago, Southside Chicago, never feeling there was a place where I can be open and honest. And, I've had my own issues with suicide ideation as well. And so I think, I know in this country, suicide is the third leading cause of death of Black men aged 25 and 34. And at one point, not long ago, the highest rate of suicide in the U.S. were Black boys aged 5 to 12. And nobody was talking about it. And so there's a certain level of invisibility. Ralph also wrote about Invisible Man. And then Paul Orndorff talked about the mask. We wear the mask that grins and lies and shades our eyes. And so I wanted to be a voice in a space where where men can start to open up and connect and build community and share what's going on with them. So preventing suicide is a daunting task. Um, some men are just so exhausted and so tired and they've sought help. They've been through systems that don't serve them. Regina King, her son, the actress, told her mother, he said, I just don't want to be here anymore. And he had been on medication. He was senior professional. He was in a facility, but he took his own life. It happens every day. But I want some Black men to know that because some of the writers in that book, they actually write about their attempts to die by suicide. So there is hope.
Yeah, and yeah, I used to be a suicide intervention trainer, teach people to intervene with suicide, and one of the hallmarks of what they taught us or what I taught them was that when you think somebody might be thinking about suicide, that the most important thing, one of the most important things, is the ability to talk to them about it and to be ask them in a comfortable manner because they could also be worried about the same thing as you, the stigma around it. You might be saying, "Well, I don't want to ask them about it because what if they're not and they're offended by it?" And then the person that's feeling it might also be hesitant or ambivalent to talk about it because they're worried that the other person might feel the same way, that they might judge them or something along those lines. And so silence just seems the worst case scenario, one of the worst case scenarios when it comes to somebody thinking about suicide. And it also makes me think, I can't remember if I brought this to your attention last time we talked, Mark, but it makes me think about this poem from Tupac, Sometimes I Cry. And he says, "Sometimes when I'm alone, I cry because I'm on my own. The tears I cry are bitter and warm. They flow with life but take no form. I cry because my heart is torn, and I find it difficult to carry on. If I had an ear to confide in, I would cry among my treasured friends. But who do you know that stops that long to help another carry on? The world moves fast, and it would rather pass you by than to stop and see what makes you cry. It's painful and sad, and sometimes I cry, and no one cares about why." And
Mm, that
you
is
know,
powerful.
when I hear it, I hear somebody that's essentially crying out for help, crying for somebody to notice the pain that he's feeling or the isolation that he's feeling. And that's a talented individual that wrote that, that should have had a lot of, even when he was younger, he should have had a lot of followers and popularity and things like that, but he still felt that way. And so what is somebody that doesn't have that? How might they feel?
Yeah. Tupac was just so brutally honest about how he felt about himself, about his culture, about life, about politics, about Black history. I mean, he even admitted that he was an addict. And he was 25 years old. So he talked about things that most young Black men did not discuss openly. And he did it with conviction, with authority, but I don't think he was really embraced for his emotional intelligence because at that time nobody was talking about self-care, psychological safety and cultural humility and ancestor wisdom. There was no language for it. There was no space for it. I mean, your podcast wasn't around, right? When
Right.
Tupac was sharing what he was going through. So where could he go and cry? But he left that behind for us to reflect on and to think about and consider. So I have much respect for Tupac.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there's a lot of wisdom that's from him, from, only living to the young age of 25. There's just, he left so much behind for us to, that can teach us and help us learn. What's up, brother KD? Peace and ancestral blessings. And good to have you, brother KD. Feel free to call in if you got any time. And David asks, why do you think there is so much stigma, such a stigma for men to talk about mental health? And what's something us as men can do to break that stigma?
Wow, that's a really powerful question. I think first it's important to recognize that I know for Black men, we didn't create the stigma. We are not the authors of the stigma. It's just something that we tend to internalize. We've internalized racism. We've internalized white supremacy mythology. We've internalized patriarchy and privilege. And our ideas around manhood and masculinity have been compromised. And sometimes the people that we listen to may not really be good for our emotional and mental and physical and spiritual well-being, but because we like the way that they dress, the way that they rap, the way that they move, the baskets that they score, the touchdowns that they make, the music that they sing, etc. You know, we kind of take what they say to heart. And I guess some of us have now been taught it's okay to be a critical thinker. because sometimes you get feminized when you express yourself in a certain way. The word nurturing tends to have a feminine quality to it, sensitive. You get, people question your sexuality. And you learn these lessons as a child, and they kind of stay with you for a long time. So having spaces like this and having dialogue where people can talk openly or just listen, just be present. You don't always have to talk, just to be present in that space. I think it really can make a difference in someone's life. But there's
What do
no
you
like one answer for that question.
Yeah, and you're right about that. There is no one answer, and everybody's different. But what do you think about, how do I say? What do you think about this idea that, that men have to be you might hear different terms like there's masculinity obviously, but there's bravado, and there's like you hear talks about how the man has to be the head of the household and control things that way. And there's a million other things that you grow up watching and hearing and about yourself as a man. And what do you think that does to us when we feel like we have to live up to those expectations? And some of us can't. I know that I come across as masculine as an adult, but as a youth, I really struggled with the sense of masculinity and with, living up to those expectations, being, my stepdad was a working man with his hands, and I just really didn't fit into that, if you know what I'm saying. And even like as when I got older, I found some bravado and learned how to fight and things like that. But as a kid, I was quite the exact opposite of it. I didn't want any kind of escalation or conflict. And actually, the first time I got in a fight, I beat up a kid after being bullied for a long time, and I felt way worse about it than when I had been the one bullied or beat up. And when I, like I said, when I turned into an adult, that kind of switched, and I found kind of like a sense of power, but it was a negative power full of anger and fear and being reactionary, if you know what I mean. And I don't feel like I ever had a space growing up, to just be my authentic self without having to live up to those expectations, if you know what I mean.
I was the same way, and I never felt safe growing up. And I come from a large family. My father worked all the time. And when he was home, he was either eating or sleeping. So we never really had that connection. And then my brothers were doing their thing. And I was good in school, but that wasn't celebrated. It wasn't respected, So people criticize the way that I speak, And so just as a kid, I never felt safe being in my own body. And then, experiencing physical and sexual and verbal abuse early on, that traumatized me so deeply that I just was in a shell a lot. And I always rooted for the underdog. There were people in my school who got picked on
Mhm.
because they had a disability or because of the color of their skin or because they were pink or whatever. And I wanted to root for them, but I didn't have the courage to say anything because I was always afraid of being hurt, being judged, being rejected. So, these issues around manhood, masculinity, they're centuries old. In this country, historically, the word gender was associated with family and race, not biology or sex. And I'm online and I see T-shirts with Scarface on them, and I'm like, why are brothers caping for Scarface? Why do we idealize somebody, you know, who was killing people and trying to in his life for cocaine and all that kind of stuff? It's the ideas that we have around manhood, masculinity, in my opinion, are worthy of reimagining. Taking another look at, do they serve us today in 2026? What I think as a man, what is masculine, does that really serve me? And my answer is no. But at the same time, I don't have like another construct to replace it with.
Mhm.
I don't use the word masculine. I don't think it's helpful. There's such a wide spectrum. So I'm still learning what it is to be a man. And I'm 65.
Yeah, that's a good reflection, and I think I'm the same. I'm 43, but I'm still figuring out what that means, and it's something that's ever unfolding, I suppose.
Yeah.
And even when you talk about it, it brings me back to Tupac. When I remember I asked a fellow Tupac fan one day that I found out he liked Tupac, and I was like, "What's your favorite song?" And he says, "Hit 'Em Up." And I was like, "Why would that be your favorite song?" And, it's because Tupac's acting masculine and badass and talking shit and whatever. But it makes me think that, and another thing I saw on social media was Candace Owens was saying that she posted this old video of Tupac when he was at the Baltimore School of Acting and said that it proved that he was gay. And I think the expectations Tupac must have had as well to uphold that perceived masculine identity, that really emerged towards this. Because if you listen to his earlier music, it's much more reflective. And even when it's in storytelling and things like that. And then later on, it gets into the more bravado and, sexuality and things like that. So it also makes me empathize with Tupac and what his expectations were and what was he allowed to really truly be his self, if you know what I mean, which, was probably closer to that image we got when he was at the Baltimore School of Arts. But it also makes me think and reflect about the differences between experiences, my experience and say a black male. I know there's a lot of diversity in both, the white male experience and the black male experience. But when I read, and this is one example, a collection of stories and anecdotes and ideas and reflections. But there's a lot out there that folks can go to. But it seems like the black individual, the black male, but the black individual period has to go through their life carrying a lot of weight that maybe I wouldn't have to carry. And you reflect on that in your essay a little bit. But and then I think that often too, black men, black people would be criticized for not being able to carry that heavy weight. Why you're supposed to pull up your bootstraps in America and just equal opportunity for everyone kind of thing. And so, in a lot of realms that I see in America, is that folks actually don't empathize with the weight that you all have to carry. And I was wondering if you might reflect on that a little bit, or tell me if I'm accurate or off mark.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're still carrying that weight. Dr. John Henry Clark says that we've been here since 1442. And in many ways, some of us feel homeless, even though we live here, we've been here for centuries. We don't feel like this is our home. And like I just sent out from my ancestry.com, I want to find out, what part of the continent are some of my ancestors from. But it's just such a paradox, because not everybody identifies as black. So, you have that identity issue as well. And then, we got ice ages in Harlem, just messing with people, in 2026. I thought I would never see that. So your question is nuanced because there's a heaviness, I think, that some of us really can't identify or we can't really express, or we don't even know how to put it into words. So we work two jobs and, we got 8 kids and, we got 3 cars. The outside looks great, but on the inside, some of us are hurting really bad, and we don't know how to let anybody know because we just don't feel, probably don't feel, because I can't speak for all black men. I can speak for myself. And I get up in the morning sometimes and I just don't want to deal with myself or the world that I live in. It's just too much. I look around and I don't always see joy or fulfillment. Sometimes all I see is just um, indifference and apathy. So you've actually given me something to not only think about, but to write about. Because, I mean, some of us are suffering, some of us struggling, some of us are happy. But every black man in America knows that it's an occupational hazard just to be in our own skin. Whether it's the police, ICE, CIA, FBI, Trump, supervisor, you know, teacher. You walk outdoors and you're menaced and you realize that maybe this is not the right place or the safe place or the best place. And where do you go with all that energy? It's difficult. It's difficult being a black man in America.
Yeah, I imagine it is. I think there's a lot to reflect on there. Makes me not want to rush into my next comment, but it makes me think so I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate, but he has this book called The Myth of Normal, and we were used it in a substance abuse class I had over the summer. And he talks about trauma as something that happened. It's not the event that took place, but it's what happens inside you as a result of the event. And he talks about a couple different things about how trauma could be hereditary, meaning it could be passed down from your parents without you really knowing it, and so on, intergenerationally. And that some of it is pre-verbal, meaning that it happens before you had the language to talk about it. Like I think kind of what you were describing, not being able to have the language to interpret what's happening to you, or how you're feeling, or how you felt at that time. And then you grow up per se, and you have these feelings inside of you, and you don't know where they come from because you don't have the language, and maybe they also happened to you before you had you didn't have the opportunity to understand it. So you have, and maybe it happened before you were even around, in parents or ancestors' time. And I think about all of the weight, again, the weight of America. And again, you list a lot of those in your essay in there, but just to throw out a couple from slavery to Jim Crow to lynching to, some of the police shootings and things we still have going on to, you know, Donald Trump posting that video clip of the Lion King thing, and it depicted the Obamas as monkeys. And I think that something that white people get wrong, in my perspective, a lot, and it's hard for me to put everybody under an umbrella, but in my life growing up, um, in the way that people have talked to me at times, is that like we, as in I'm just speaking of white people collectively, we are unable to see or to feel the pain or the weight that the black man or the black human carries. And it also reminds me of like, so, I've always been somebody to different degrees according to my knowledge and what I had going on in my life, but I've always been an ally and a friend of the black people that I knew. Always looked at things that way. But there would always be the friends that would push my limits, if you know what I mean. They would say something racist. And then if you don't respond to them, it gives them a wiggle room to do a little bit more, if you know what I mean, to push my limits a little bit more to where then I really have to, make a decision about my values and how I'll respond. I have a, st- I had a friend. I was going through my undergrad at BSW in my BSW, and I remember I had a policy class, and I had this really good professor that had spent time in Africa, and she was teaching us about some of the stories of land being taken from black folks during the civil rights kind of era, and it went into lynching and talked about it. And my friend picked me up after class, and he said to me, and I was telling him about the video we watched and like how it was disturbing me. And he's like, "Oh, okay, bro." And he like gets a little smirk on his face, and he says, "Well, would you do it?" And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Oh, well, would you lynch and use the N word?" And I was like, I couldn't believe he said such a thing. Like I was just took it threw me off. Honestly, I really hadn't heard somebody speak in that language in a person to person. I've seen it on TV and heard it elsewhere, but never heard somebody be that direct and to say something like that. And still to my this day, I don't really know if what he thought it was a clean joke, if he was really trying to be a jerk and racist about it, or trying to demean my feelings toward it, or what. I don't know. But I had to check him and say, what did you say? And I don't remember exactly how it went down, but it turned out that I had to get out of the car and leave. He doubled down on it. And it makes me think of Donald Trump and the climate of today because, like, there's been several things. I think if you even go back before he was running, he had the whole thing with Obama having him check the birth certificate thing, the birther whole thing. But I think someone like Trump, what it reminds me of is that friend that if you give them, they'll throw in a little elbow room trying to, be a little bit racist. And if you give them an inch, then they'll keep going with it. And that's where I've seen and heard the things that really bother me is, those when I'm in a taxi, for example, and a taxi driver thinks because I'm a white guy that they can throw some kind of racial joke or throw their racial politics at me or something like that, and it's okay. And obviously you have to pick your battles. But if that weighs on me, I wonder how much it weighs on you, Mark, that has to deal with it when it's about you and you see it everywhere. And again, going back to that weight of it, I just think, and not having somebody to talk to at times, I just think it feels like it could become unbearable to me. And I wonder, how do you cope with that? How do you deal with it?
Well, I mean, thank God I have people in my life who know me and who love me and would accept me for who I am, and we could talk. I have a community of people who we can dialogue and we share, we listen, we laugh. Sometimes we cry. So I'm not alone. Although sometimes I feel alone, but I have that emotional reaction of feeling alone, or sometimes even feeling lonely, or feeling invisible, or feeling numb because it's just part of the furniture. You know, and I think also some people act like Donald Trump invented racism. I don't believe that he emboldens people to be a certain way. I believe that people who are who they are, and he's just one person on the planet who just has a job now because he used to be a TV talk show host, and now he's president. And some people believe that because he's president now, he's giving people a license for their bigotry and their that white supremacy mythology. I don't believe that at all. But I do know there are people who think like him and feel like him, and they may feel a bit more comfortable because he's president, but he didn't make them the way that they are. So, in response to your question, there is a weight, and it hasn't been freely lifted off of my shoulder. Like I said, I'm 65. So, I've survived Reagan and Bush, and I thought we couldn't get any worse than Ronald Reagan. And then now Donald Trump comes along. So, it's a daily challenge. I'm just grateful that I have people that I can talk to, and sometimes I'll just put on some music or I'll listen to Richard Pryor and he makes me laugh. I see you got his
Mhm.
t-shirt, right? Is that Richard Pryor you have on your t?
No, Richard Pryor's not on there. I think that's Haile Selassie,
Well, okay, my
Emperor of
bad.
Ethiopia.
He
Yeah,
looks like Richard Pryor. I wanted to ask you about that.
yeah.
But yeah, so comedy has helped me a lot and just journaling my feelings, music, prayer, meditation. There's different modalities that I go into the gym, having a healthy meal. But even after all that, I still have to come back to this world and my reality. And, it's not always a happy place. So it's a day at a time, bro. It's a day at a time.
Yeah, well, thinking about again going back to Tupac and saying that he just wishes he had someone to listen to him, to cry with him, maybe, and then reading through some of these. What was your experience? I'm sure you had, based on my interactions with you, I'm sure you had quite a bit of interaction with all these individuals in here and the stories that they tell. What is there? I guess I should say, is there an underlying, not an underlying, but is there something that stands out in you know something that, like, say, a social worker could have done to help any of these individuals or intervened or listened to them? Have social work students in here that are going to be going out into the world soon and practicing social work. And, what do you think these men, if they could collectively say something to the social workers, what would they tell them about what they need?
Well, when I was in therapy, I had a therapist who said to me, be where you are. And that was 30 years ago. I still remember that. And I think it's important to just don't try to fix people, just be in their presence. Let them share their experience with you. Don't be in a rush to analyze it or assess it or figure it out or even to understand, just to really just be in their presence. There's value in people's lived experience. And I think it's important to reach out to people with lived experience for policy, for guidelines, for strategy. It's good to have somebody with lived experience in the room
Hmm.
making decisions that benefit the institution or the organization. When you put together a workshop, have somebody who has experience, not just credentials, and training. All that's important. But to have someone who can actually tell you what it's like every day to be in their body, to be in their mind, to be in their spirit, this is what I'm dealing with every single day. I think that can be revolutionary
Hmm.
because that's not the norm in this country. In this country, they teach you to go to school so you get a job and pay taxes. You know what I mean? You become a consumer and you don't learn how to think critically and you don't learn how to be radical. Uh, it's okay to have a different perspective that's not the same one as your professor. Because sometimes professors don't want to hear anything you have to say. And I'm sure you probably know that. You know what I'm saying? So you're in school and you ask a question, and now your question becomes a problem. That's the
Hmm.
cultural silence that we have to deal with every single day. We are taught to be silent, to be quiet. Somebody told LeBron James to shut up and dribble. I forgot her name, Laura something, Laura Ingle or whatever. And so
Laura
he,
Ingram.
yeah. So what did he do? He created a company. He's a filmmaking company. It's called Shut Up and Dribble. Spike Lee created 40 Acres and a Mule. So we kind of have to turn that oppression around and make it work for us. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think, something that comes up too is I think you alluded to it just a little bit, but this modern day world, everything is about debates and arguments, and even Sports Center, right? If you turn on Sports Center or whatever on ESPN today, they're going to have two or three people and they're going to have a scripted argument, essentially. If you turn it on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, any of the news channels, they're going to be, at at least I believe, I don't know what they have in their back rooms, but a lot of it seems scripted, putting people opposite sides, making them talk shit to each other and fight. You see it with the how they really escalated the whole Bad Bunny, whatever, the patriotic Kid Rock thing. You see it in so many instances. People can watch the same film of somebody getting shot, the Minnesota thing, and come with completely different interpretations and then argue about, what it is that they saw on a slowed down, clip by clip thing that should be obvious. And what I found is what works for me in education as a social work professor is creating that space like you mentioned. So it's a multicultural classroom, obviously, of people from various perceived racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, different ages, all that. And so I found by utilizing a talking circle and, making sure everybody has equal space to share what's on their heart and to talk about what we're learning about, to talk about themselves and their experience. That's a really beautiful thing and, brings people together and builds what I call critical and unity consciousness. And before we got on camera, you mentioned that the book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And was a Brazilian educator, thinker. And, he would, I wish I had the exact quote here, but he says essentially that education could either be, conforming to the norms. And he calls it the banking model of education, where you come in as the student, I'm the professor, I sit up here and give you a lecture, deliver it to you. You learn it, I give you an exam. Basically, I transfer information to you. And he would say that that's just upholding the norms of today and the youth or whoever's in school. In my sense, it can be older folks as well, but they don't play a role in it. They don't see how it connects to them. They don't see how it connects to the world. It doesn't help them understand themselves or the world better. It's just a transfer of information. So, inspired by him and others, I utilize talking circles and everybody gets a chance. I don't have any arguments in my class. People listen to each other especially after spending several circles together. They're growing closer together instead of, say, your story and my story. It becomes our stories together. Even if we have different paths that we took to get here or different backgrounds, we find out that we're trying to get to a similar destination and people grow together. And I think it's one of the most beautiful things. And if you'd be interested, Mark, I'd love to invite you to one sometime. We host them twice a week, but I think that would be a beautiful experience to have your presence in one of those.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to come. Sure.
Yeah. Any other ideas you have for me as an educator or social workers to create that kind of space besides the talking circle? I think you mentioned in here or in your book, you mentioned all kinds of things like barbershops and other venues where folks and there's another social work podcaster, Professor Gary Taylor, and he does a lot of work on that, like being your authentic self and being able to have conversations in a barbershop. But any ideas you have for where we can create those kind of spaces where folks can feel free to talk and to listen to each other?
Um, well, I also think it's important to consider not just a safe space, but a creative space. So, in addition to talking, meeting people where they already are, whether it's on the basketball court,
Mm,
whether it's in the backyard, whether it's in a barbershop, meeting space places where people are already socially gathered, where they already feel safe and comfortable, and it offering them the opportunity to be creative, whether it's art, rapping, dancing, painting, sewing, because I like the idea of a talking circle. But in addition to the talking circle, I think it's important to give people the space where they can really create something maybe they've never even thought about,
mm,
or they've never been encouraged to do so or supported. Like some people really want to put something on paper, but no one says, let's do this on Saturdays at 4 o'clock. We'll get together for an hour. They have this thing called sip and paint. You guys have it there?
not that I know of.
Sip and paint is where you go to a place and you drink and you paint. So they have
Okay.
alcohol and they paint for a couple hours or whatever. I would, you know, prefer people do it without the alcohol. But that's just something that they do in New York. I don't know if they do in other parts of the country, but um I think it would be helpful to have a creative space where people can really create something for an hour, once a week, once a month, and let that be part of their way of healing.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I'm teaching social human behavior in the social environment class, like a junior level class this semester. And next module, we get into that our textbook by these really cool people named Dr. Michael Yellowbird and Chris Clark. They're like decolonizing social work educators, and they have a whole chapter on creative expression and how you can use it in social work. Kind of with an indigenous lens. And I have some other things for them as well. And so, those of you that are in that class, it's a good thing to think about is how can you be creative? And I think about, let's say, like a traditional counselor or therapist, kind of like the banking model of education, the teacher and the students, but maybe you got a desk in the middle, person comes in, the therapist sits over here, maybe they have some back and forth, some talking. And sure, that could be good. You could get a lot out of it, out of that talking and that therapy, depending on the circumstances. But think about the way that Mark described it a minute ago. Think about expanding that to meeting them where they're at, whether that's on the basketball court, a barber shop, wherever it is, a library, places that people like to go. I have a friend of mine, Natalia Tuipulotu in Honolulu, and she meets her clients for walks, like on the beach or through the city and things like that. And think how much you might achieve differently in that regard. Think about broadening that to opening up creative spaces like Mark was talking about, depending on what the individual like to do. And I think that could be that includes being open-minded in a number of ways. If you're a teacher, you could let somebody crochet or knit or do what they do in class while they're paying attention to you. Maybe as a therapist, you can allow folks to do things like that. And then there's a lot of great social workers out there that are into creativity and art therapy and things like that. Think about how, for you future social workers, think about yourself and what you want to be and what kind of things you could include. And I think a good way to look at that is, as you as the social worker, what are you interested in? Because you're always going to do things better that you like doing. If you like to do a certain kind of art, you're going to be better at helping other people achieve that or creating space for it. But then also making sure that we're leaving it open and we know we have the space for that individual that you're working with to let you know what they're interested in and to build that as well. Because like Mark said, they may not know. They may need to explore those kind of things. And, think about that in comparison with the two people on the opposite side of the desk with an hour time limit versus something that's bigger, that's more imaginative. It just sounds beautiful to me. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, Mark.
Some boys and men have never been asked, "What do you enjoy doing?" That puts a smile on your face. They've never been asked that question. They just go to work, go to school, go to church, whatever. Not that that's bad or wrong, but they've never been given the opportunity to express themselves in a creative way. And then they'll never know what could come about, how that can really do something for their art, for their soul, to be creative, however it manifests, because there's so many ways to do it. So I think that's also important as a social worker, and it helps to engage people in non-traditional, non-conventional ways, maybe in ways in which you haven't been educated, because that's going to be limited as well, because you have westernized ways of doing their job. But then there's other ways that they do it on the continent, like they do drumming, right? So maybe you could have a client who could drum for 15 minutes and then talk.
Yeah.
I mean, just something different, being open-minded.
Yeah, and from my experience and my perspective too, it opens up those channels. If somebody's been holding on or carrying some weight or has some trauma, it's much more likely to be able to come forth and flow through you if that channel's open. And that could be even, I remember when I was working with troubled youth, something as simple as offering them some silence, like sitting with them in silence when everybody's yapping at them and asking them what's wrong. And you just sit with them. Eventually they'll talk to you. Like a kid that liked basketball, I'd have some certain individuals that like basketball and they wouldn't want to talk. You could tell they're agitated and upset. Go for a walk and get them on the basketball court, rebound for them, pass it to them so they can shoot. You'd be amazed at how much somebody starts talking when you get them in their own realm, get them comfortable.
Therapist once, she met me at an organic food store. I had never been to an organic food store in my life. I didn't know what the hell was, I didn't know. But it was just her idea. She thought it might be helpful because she knew I was raised on wheat, sugar, pork, and chocolate. So she said, "Meet me here." And we spent 30 minutes walking around the store, reading labels. It was fascinating. I would never have thought about that, right? One time we met on a bench in Central Park. Beautiful day, we just sat in the park. Like, she showed me other ways of being and not just being in an office where it's, antiseptic and you feel like you're in a psych ward or whatever. She got me out to get in touch with nature and, so now even today I eat organic food, not all the time, but I mean, she kind of introduced me to that, and that was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's something that people may want to consider.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent story. And the little seeds that you can plant as a social worker or as anybody that's in the realm of, interacting with other folks. Um, like you said, the planting the seed. I had when I went to rehab a long time ago, I had this guy come in and talk about yoga and breath work, and I thought he was a kook at the time, but he planted a little bit of the seed, and I had those words in my vocabulary now. And later on, now they're, deep parts of my life that really improve the quality of my life. And so I think social workers in a number of ways can plant seeds. And that's what I go back to. If what you know and what you're interested in, you can pass some of that on, and you're going to be much more likely to do it if you're interested in it. But I think it's also an opportunity to learn. as a social worker, as an educator. I think you said it a minute ago, Mark, but you don't know everything. And so you can learn from folks. They might be able to teach you a skill or pass it on to you. If they want to know, like you said, the kid that doesn't know what they like or what makes them happy, well, exploring that together, you may be able to learn something new together. And those are, really cool moments in the social worker that not only help somebody else, but help yourself in the process and build upon your life. And reminds me of like this podcast. So I have this podcast and I give it to my students and pass it out to the larger social work community. But if I'm honest about it, I'm the one that benefits the most. I'm the one that gets to talk to people like you, Mark, and take it all in and hear all that. And think I've talked to almost maybe over 100 people in the last 4 or 5 years. And so I think about, all the many things I've been able to, many areas I've been able to gain empathy in, deeper understanding, deeper connection, create, bonds of kinship and things like that. And so I think as a social worker, don't take for granted those opportunities that you might have in that regard to learn and grow as well from the people that you're working with.
I also think it's important to be mindful of how you question people, how you engage people, to not put them on the defensive unintentionally. So instead of asking somebody what's wrong, maybe you can ask them, where does it hurt? You know? Because when somebody asks me what's wrong, like if I call you and I say, hey, so I'm depressed, and you say what's wrong, now I feel wrong. Like my humanity is wrong. So I'm already messed up. Now I feel worse. Sometimes I just think it's important to be mindful of the questions that we ask people so they don't feel worse than they did before they came into the space.
Yeah, and that's great advice. If you think about just the question you said, the what's wrong? I mean, it just frames it from, and I mean, most of us have used that in some context, you know what I mean? But saying what's wrong, it just comes from a negative, it comes from a negative standpoint, a negative perspective. But then, like you said, you're projecting onto them that something is wrong with them versus they're feeling pain or they're hurting, and trying to explore that in a deeper way. So I appreciate that.
When a little boy cries, somebody would might say, what's wrong with you? But if a little girl cries, they'll say, are you okay? It's a whole different experience. And right away, you're anxious now because now I got to tell you what's wrong with me. I don't even know what's wrong. But the little girl, she gets a hug, she gets a kiss. Are you okay? Let's go get some ice cream. But the little boy gets interrogated. You should know better. Why did you do this? It's a whole different way of socializing people to think, okay, there's something inherently wrong with my gender because I'm expressing something on the inside that I don't understand, but I have to get it out.
Yeah, and Mark, you're speaking directly to me because although I may be better than some on this in this regard, I have two little girls, and the oldest is a boy, and I wouldn't do exactly what you said, but in the realm of that, my little girls are crying for whatever reason, okay, big hug, and it's my instinct. I don't know if instinct, but I've been conditioned to when it's my boy. I'm not saying I don't comfort him or anything like that, but I'll be much more likely to be like, you got to be strong. You got to deal with it. You got to get up and not cry about it and deal with it. And you make me reflect on that and how I'm treating my own children and how I can grow in that area. So I appreciate you, Mark.
Why do you think we tell boys? Why do you think some of us tell boys don't cry?
Well, I think if I were even looking at my own perspective, when I would cry as a kid, I felt like people like my stepdad and other youth and stuff, they would think that I was weak and they would make fun of me for it and they would criticize me for it. And so then over time, I would have built up my own walls or my own, safety spots in that regard because I didn't want that feeling of people looking down on me or, making fun of me for not being boy enough or man enough. Then later on in life, without investigating those feelings and those ideas and those thoughts, you turn into the exact same thing or person that bothered me in the first place, if you know what I'm saying, because you haven't dealt with it. So I think it just reinforces itself. I think you see it on TV movies. I mean, what's the common thing if a boy throws a bad throw, what is it? You throw like a girl.
Which means there's
So
something wrong with the girl. There's a certain level of misogyny and that type of thinking, in my opinion. You know, when boys don't act like a girl, don't act like a girl. You talk like a girl, you walk like a girl. Like there's something wrong with the girl being a girl. It's really sad.
yeah. And like I said, if you don't examine it, it's so prevalent in our culture and the culture here in America and subcultures as well that you're just going to reinforce those things without ever really considering it. You know what I mean?
People were criticizing Bad Money because of his physical attire. But sometimes the colors he wears or the clothes that he wears, and maybe he wear a dress or whatever, or maybe his nails are painted or something like that. So now all of a sudden he's queer because of how he presents himself. And we have so many sad and, convoluted ideas around manhood and masculinity that they don't work. But people are so quick to say, like I'm wearing Frank Ocean. Are you familiar with Frank Ocean, the artist?
Yeah, yeah.
So when Frank Ocean made that big song, big hit, Thinking of You, he mentioned in the song that he had kissed a guy, right? And then he later publicly admitted he was 19, the guy was 23, right? In the song, he says, I kissed you because I like you, or something like that. But people automatically said, well, he must be gay just because he kissed a guy. And guys kiss each other all over the world on the lips, the cheek, the forehead, the neck. It has nothing to do with sexuality. It's all about affection, care, intimacy, brotherhood, friendship. But in this country specifically, if you kiss a guy or a girl, people call you gay, you're lesbian, you're queer, so forth and so on. Brother KD?
Yeah, you see that everywhere. What's up, KD?
Hey, what's up? Y'all caught me off guard. I was
See,
looking at your book, brother. But hey, lot of good conversation. What's up, uh, brother Mark,
it's good to
Professor
see you, man.
Ace? Yeah, same. Likewise,
Yeah.
likewise. Powerful book. I've read this like 4 times. I'm gonna keep
Wow.
it. I'm gonna keep it all the way 100.
Thank
Four
you.
times, and you know, hearing everything that y'all have to say about masculinity and, the stereotypes and the assumptions that are made and the maladjustments, it just made me all just think about just the way in which socialization occurs and the way that it gets perpetuated from generation to generation. And when you're in that container where you have your uncles or your father, your grandfather, the neighborhood so and so, the preacher, what have you, and they're inculcating these ideas and these thoughts that when you express your full humanity, that's wrong. And that you need to structure yourself in a way that is arbitrarily more manly. And it just made me think about that because I too went through the same thing. I wasn't that type of boy growing up where I wanted to, shovel dirt and look under a car to see where the leak is coming from. And no, I wasn't like that. I wanted to hang out with the girls. I mean, I didn't like my hands getting dirty. That was another thing of mine. I didn't like my hands getting dirty until I was like 15, 16 years old, until I was okay with getting a little dirt on it, get a little dirt on my fingernail. But everything that you're speaking about just really made me think about that sociological piece, that thing, that acculturation of when we are surrounded by our loved ones and our kinfolk and society. And then on top of that, you got media and you got images. And all of that is just inundating your mind and your personality with I guess, the conceptions of what gender is and what race is and what is a city person versus a rural person, what's country folk, and so it's all those things. And when you don't have that secure blanket of I can be who I am destined to be, or and I can experience all the colors and textures in my humanity, then yeah, you grow up resenting the notions of crying and resenting the notions of dabbling in anything that may seem, I guess, abnormal. And it warps the worldview. I mean, that's essentially. So I was listening to y'all and I was like, oh, I gotta just share that because my brother, I love the concept of cultural silence and wounded souls because it's a historical and intergenerational, multi-generational phenomenon. It's not just something that we're dealing with today. So thank you, brother, for that. Thank you for shedding that light.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Thank you, KD. And I like what you said about the resenting not being able to be authentic, you know, especially when you don't really have any models of people who or men who really can just be their genuine selves. You know, it's easy to say, well, let me just be like Lil Wayne because he got 5 million tattoos.
Yeah, yeah.
That's bad or wrong, but like sometimes people put on tattoos and not even know why they're wearing tattoos
Absolutely.
until 10 years later.
Yeah,
That
absolutely. Absolutely, man. Right on.
that's why, 3 or 4 of my tattoos are cover-ups of tattoos I got before I had that conversation with myself.
It happens. It happens.
I mean, it's not that there's a judgment about it, but it's just like I know for myself, I did things growing up and I didn't even know why I did them. I just did them. And then I realized I was just trying to get people to like me because I didn't like myself. And today I like myself. You know what I mean? So when I walk out the door, I'm not concerned about people's opinion about how I look, how I talk, how I walk. But, I'm 65. It took me a long time.
Yeah.
I feel you on that. I mean, that's exhausting. I mean, that living in the shadow of someone else's approval and acceptance and I am actually speaking from lived experience. I was a people pleaser when I was a young boy and even into my early 20s. All I wanted was to be loved and liked and accepted. That's it. I just wanted to feel like I belonged in any space among any group of people, and that type of openness, it all stems from a traumatic past of some insecure attachment. And I had a lot of insecure attachment, especially, and I've spoken to you, Mark, about it especially with men. I had a very insecure attachment with men due to my, not feeling comforted, loved, understood, valued, appreciated, all the things as a little boy. And so here I am trying to find my boy group, and I'm literally just coming as I am, and I'm seeing what is being talked about. I'm seeing the language that's being used, the activities that are being done, and I'm just conforming because naturally it goes against my inclination to do any of those things and to say any of those things. And so I did the same thing. Bro. I was a mess when I was a little boy. I was literally lost and wandering the world of the social world, trying to find my way. And it literally took Black women, i.e., my wife, when she met me, when we were 17, and she showed me and I didn't have to conform and assimilate to anybody. And that my personality, my essence, my presence is good enough. And again, I'm saying that now because I've done the work, but it took a while. I met her when I was 17, and it really didn't kick in until I was like 25, 26. And then having kids too also helps you see yourself in all the good, the bad, the indifferent, and when that also helped out too.
Did it help you, brother KD? Just the essence, you mentioned your wife and your kids. I think for me, what they did for me, and I think I found mine a little bit later in life, but I felt, like you said, alone and lost and always searching for that sense of belonging and comfort, which I didn't necessarily get as a child. And so as an adult, I was longing for that. And then when I got a wife and kids, in a sense, being able to know that I come home every day and somebody's going to love me, and there's no doubt about it. Like I trust my wife to the 110%, if you know what I mean. So I don't have that concern. I get to come home every day, or if I'm already home, and know that there's somebody here that loves me, that would listen to me if I had something to say. It grounds me and it gives me permission to be authentic in a way that I didn't have before. I mean, there's other elements to it as well, brother KD, but having that family and the partner that I knew I could trust, and know that I can trust at all times, it gave me that permission to, or maybe that space to truly be myself. And I was wondering if you had similar
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. At first I was fighting it and I was resisting all of the blessings that were bestowed upon me. And because I couldn't believe that I didn't believe I deserved it. And that also just comes from a lack of self-love and a very negative and restricted self-concept. And so here I am being loved by this Nubian queen who wants to give me the world, who wants to protect me from all forces who want to destroy me and hurt me and do harm. And now I'm having children too. And so it hit me so quick, so hard, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And so for especially my oldest is 12. So when he came into the world, I was still trying to hold on to the immaturity, not wanting to focus on what is most important, and that's the posterity of the children. But then right before we had our girl, in 2016, everything started to really make sense about my place as father, as husband, as human. My kids are what I always call my daily affirmation of ancestral blessings. You know, they weren't bestowed to me coincidentally, and they weren't bestowed to me with the woman that I've loved since I was 17 years old just by chance. And so when I stopped looking at things as, oh, I'm lucky, oh, this is a coincidence, oh, somehow, some way this happened, and I looked at it as, no, this is a gift. This is divine working. This is my mission. This is my divine mission, my purpose, and this is a part of my divine destiny. Now, when I started looking at things like that, and it took me to read and reconstruct my consciousness and all of that, and every day, I've been a stay-at-home father for like 2 years now, and every day it's a reminder. They are a reminder of how special, how sensitive, and how precious life is. And I get it, a lot of people don't have kids, but even the kids that are in your life, whether your niece, nephew, your little cousin, the little kid that lived next door to you, or what have you, they are divine blessings. They do not come here in this world for the sake of just coming in. No, they come in, or, they are chosen. So anybody that knows biology knows that the egg chooses the sperm. So it's not this random biological reproductive experience. It is a spiritual experience. And so, yeah, as you can see, I'm smiling. I'm happy. Like I haven't been this happy in so long, and it really took me to embrace. And Brother Mark was hitting on this, embracing the femininity aspect of things and bringing that in integration with your manliness or your masculinity, whatever you want to call it. I just call it an integrated self. I don't look at them as masculinity versus femininity. I look at it has to be together because that's what it was designed to be. It wasn't designed to be this fragmented thing where I'm only this way and you're only that way. Like, no, it's supposed to be complementary. We're supposed to be an integrated whole. And that's regardless if you're married or not married or not. That's just the nature of humanity, not to be rigid and structured and labeling, this is how I am, this is how you are, these are the roles for me, this is the roles for you. It's like, how do we come together and how do we bring our strengths, our talents, our gifts, our intellect, all of that in order to continue to create things that are beautiful and lovely and filled with everlasting happiness. And so, but yeah, if it wasn't for my kids and for my wife, I don't think that I'll be having a conversation with neither one of you. And I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't be in the position that I am now. I would, yeah, I wouldn't have this level of enlightenment.
I'm unlearning what I was taught about what's masculine and what's feminine. And now I just kind of focus on the energy that I experience on the inside without
Yeah.
having a construct attached to it. Because I don't feel like I have to live up to somebody else's idea. But for a long time I did. I had to be like my mother, my father, my uncle, my aunt, and so forth and so on. And it's exhausting, trying to fill their cup. Like my
Yeah.
mother wanted me to be a dancer, my father wanted me to be a tennis player. They never asked me what I wanted to be. You know what I'm saying? And I didn't want to disappoint them or be a burden, so I tried to please them. I ended up feeling less than, and feeling empty. And so today, I don't really think too much about masculine energy and feminine. I just think about energy
Hmm.
in my spirit. What's good for my spirit. I don't think about it in terms of this is masculine, this is feminine, this is a man, this is a woman. I know we live in those worlds, but I'm learning all that today. You know what I mean? And so I feel a lot more freedom because I don't feel like I have to be like this man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or like
No, I
this
did.
woman. I could just be like them because I love them, I respect them, I honor them, but not because of their gender
Yeah.
or the identity they were tested at birth. So I just wanted to share that.
No, I love that, brother. Love that.
Yeah, and thinking about the idea of autonomy or choice, and many of us don't know we have a choice, right? When you're talking about perceived masculinity or what it means to be a boy or a man, like how a couple of us have shared our stories already of feeling that you were kind of hedged in to behaving that way, and it came about through a slow process, but eventually, you capitulate to it to some
Yes.
degree, and you
Yeah.
become that.
Yeah.
And so I think the comment that Alice had way back, one of the authors I was talking about, the decolonizing social workers, Chris Clark, she said, "Save the boys" when talking about youth and masculine role models, and creating the space like for all the three of us. Like, what if we were able to explore that as boys instead of much later when we were men, and the potential for growth that we might have had, you know, at that time versus having to wait until later. But I just wanted to say one thing, man, brother KD, when you were talking earlier,
Yeah.
it made my eyes water up because I never talked about it in such a way before. I don't even think I talked about it with my wife before. But if I were to say like, what's my biggest, maybe not right now, but especially early on in the relationship and going through some ups and downs, the biggest criticism I would have for my wife would be that she loved somebody like me. It was my own, like the looking glass self reflecting back at her. And how can you truly love yourself or allow somebody to love you if you don't? I mean, I should say that again. How can you allow somebody else to love yourself if you don't feel that love for yourself and you don't believe that it's there? I used to really truly believe that I was cursed. And so, how can this woman, this beautiful woman that's so intelligent and all of this, that has all the qualities I ever wanted, how could she love and care about somebody like me who's cursed, if you know what I'm saying? And so
Mhm.
I would almost hate on her for that. I would say those things, but like literally it was running through my veins and my consciousness. And I really had to get over myself to really truly be able to be open to love another person and let them love me, if you know what I'm saying. So it was a process, but I appreciate you sharing, Brother KD, because it really brought that out for me.
No, absolutely. And before I leave, I wanted to just share, like, again, I was looking at my brother's book, and there was a particular page that really I keep coming back to it. I keep coming back to it because when we're talking about self love, Bell Hooks, she talks about how love is the will to extend oneself for another's spiritual development. So, with that definition, it says nothing about romanticism, nothing about eroticism, nothing about pleasure. It has everything to do with that person to person development, person to person connection. And there was a brother here in your editorial, brother Mark. He's, oh my goodness, I'm trying to find it real quick. Hey yo. Okay. Page 45, and he says on his first paragraph that for we as Black men love others, we must first love ourselves. Loving through our trauma requires we, one, acknowledge our privileges and how we use them. Two, embrace femininity and vulnerability. And three, purge ourselves of internalized white supremacy. And that's where, again, when we're resisting against intimacy, resisting against people reflecting nothing but love, compassion to us, when we are responding in self defeating, self sabotaging ways, if we're numbing or we're stonewalling or we're just, we're diverting our energy to seeking some type of distraction rather than sitting with the discomfort of things, it has a lot to do with how do we extend, self-extend spiritual development through our own being and then to others. And it all begins with first us doing self inner work. It all starts there. It all starts there. So thank you, brother Mark, for giving us this gem, giving us this this nugget of wisdom that I continue to keep peeling back and I keep using when I'm doing my relational work or pedagogy or writing or what have you. I'm always coming back to it. And thank you, Professor Ace, for having me, for being a friend, and for us building on this relationship, and for all of the social worker students out there. Continue to redefine the way in which that you practice, the way that you conceptualize, and the way that you visualize social work. It does not need to fit in a particular box. Sometimes it may not even have to fit what's in the textbooks. Okay, social work is very expansive, it's flexible, and it can touch any aspect of human life. So, thank y'all for having me. I'm glad to be a part of this.
Thank you, brother KD. I didn't know you were going to be here.
Me neither. I was just going to listen, but then when I heard Professor A said, "Hey, if you can call in," I'm like, "Well, I got a little time, and
Okay.
I miss being in your community, your presence, brother Mark." So, uh, yeah, I definitely wanted to get up on here and show some love.
And there's a 2-hour time difference. You're in Colorado, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So, and Hawaii, is that 5 hours behind New York City?
5 hours, and then when you all hit daylight savings, it goes to 6.
Okay. Wow. So you are early.
No, it's not too early yet, but sometimes forget of these you East Coast guys, I gotta get up early sometimes
Yeah.
for the podcast.
I am not a morning person, bro. I'm not present before 10 a.m. I don't do anything professional.
I used to be that way, but I changed with kids. You know, they go to sleep early and they get up early, so it is what it is.
Yeah.
Brother KD, I just want to say appreciate you, aloha, and for those of you that appreciated the conversation, Brother KD will be coming back. We don't have a date set yet,
Yeah,
but sometime in the late spring, we'll be coming back
I'll
for
be
another
back.
conversation.
I will be back. All right, Alafia, Hotep, peace and love.
All
All
right,
right,
brother.
aloha,
Enjoy the
brother.
rest of your day.
Oh,
Mark, we got a lot of comments and questions in here. So since we've been talking for a while, let's get to some of these so we don't ignore the folks. Rowan says, I had a similar conversation about toxic masculinity with my fiance the other day. My question is to both Mark and Professor Ace is, in your opinion, in a world that is easy to break down and away from toxic masculinity and patriarchal values, how do we find ways to celebrate masculinity in a positive and non toxic way? And in what ways can we work as men to reshape the system in a healthy way for everyone? I know you don't like that term masculinity, so maybe we need to even use it, reframe the question with a different word. Mark, what do you think?
No, no. I mean, just because I don't use it doesn't mean no one else should. And I respect the question. I think it might be helpful or useful to reimagine what masculinity is to yourself, not to what you read from an author or a poet or a writer or a musician or even your father. Like, what does that mean? What does that hold? What do you experience when you talk about masculinity? I think maybe they did. You said his name was Rowan.
Rowan, yeah.
So I think maybe Rowan can start with just, self inquiry, self awareness. Does it have meaning? Does it have purpose? Does it have value? Do you really care about being masculine? Because if you don't care about being masculine, why are you trying to be? And I'm not saying this to him personally, but I spent too much time trying to be masculine. And I realized I was just neglecting myself. So I think it might be helpful to reimagine a world where you use another way to express yourself. Or if you're going to use that word, try to figure out what that means to you. And does it really have any use in your life and in your relationships? And have those discussions with the people that you love and care about.
Yeah, I think that's great advice to, reflect on it, what it means to you and, not take it, as like we've talked about all the ways that the world tries to imprint it upon you. So instead, or in addition to that, or to counteract that, is to reflect on what it means to you and what would be the ultimate sense of being a man or a masculine. What would that mean to you? If it could be, idealized in some way. But I think also just going back to if you're talking about like as for society or what ways can we work as men to reshape the system in a healthy way for everyone. And I think it goes back to making sure that when we're boys, when the boys of the next generation, when they're still boys, that they have that opportunity to be themselves and we listen to them, we hear them. And I think that we can change as adults. Mark and I are testaments of that, really good testaments. But it's hard to change as an adult, and it's much easier to create a good human being when you start early on. And part of that is providing the space and the opportunity for them to be themselves, even like what Mark talked about with art and expressing yourself in different ways and things like that, making sure that each individual, each boy has an opportunity to do that, especially when they're not as masculine as the perceived masculine that all three of us, Mark, brother KD, and I all reflected that we didn't fit into that. So it's making sure that those opportunities are there. David said, I think meeting outside the typical office is a great idea, or going back to us walking around and doing things outside the box. I've read that in Japan, they do something called forest bathing to help people heal in nature.
Mm.
Yeah, sounds cool. I haven't heard of that, but I'll have to look it up. But yeah, I think, you know,
What's it called, Ace?
he said forest therapy or forest bathing in Japan.
Okay. That sounds interesting. Yeah.
I think just reimagining social work right here from the office to, inside of a forest or on a beach or at a park or something, that's revolutionary in itself. If we just transform that, it would be better. I think even comparing it to prison, Ta-Nehisi Coates calls prisons like the gray wastelands, meaning it's like everything's gray and dull and lame. And what folks that are wounded in prison probably need is sunlight and nature and you know, aesthetic beauty and things like that, opportunities to express themselves. And I'd say it's the same, and it's same or similar in therapy. You're in this, you know, cream colored room that's all, you know, painted therapeutically and things like that, but you're in closed walls. And maybe what people really need is, that outside expression. Any more thoughts on that,
Well,
Mark?
you made me think about this book that I read a long time ago. It was called Love Without Conditions: Reflections of a Christ Mind. I can't think of the guy's name, Paul something. I can't think of his last name. My bad for that. But he mentioned in the book that we all have the same basic needs, that we all have a need to be loved and accepted for who we are. We have a need to feel safe. We have a need to feel appreciated. We have a need to belong. We have a need to express ourselves in a creative way. We have a need to cultivate our spirit. And reading that book gave me a whole nother idea around what I need as opposed to what I want. You know, do I need to identify myself the way my father does, my uncle does, my best friend does? Or can I be, like you said, autonomy? Like, I value the spirit of autonomy. It makes me feel powerful without being harmful, you know? And that way I don't have to apologize for my existence. I don't have to explain myself. Because I spend a lot of time trying to explain, because I want you to like me and understand me. But today I like and understand myself. So
Mm.
I've got nothing to hide, nothing to prove. So I think it's important to get in touch with what you need, especially as a social worker. What are your needs? You know, what do you need as opposed to what you want? Like, you probably want to get paid. You know what I mean? And you probably you may want a house and a car and all that. And not that that's bad or wrong, but what do you need in order to be of service to the people that you are encountering professionally? I think that may be something to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of social workers are wounded themselves. That's why they get into the work. And so I always say this, but the best social worker is a thriving social worker, one that takes care of themselves. I focus in my classes, I place a huge emphasis on self-application. How are you gonna apply this to somebody else if you haven't, filled that hole or healed that wound in yourself? You know what I mean? If you haven't even addressed it. And I think, that's where you get into later on, you have wounded social workers helping wounded, clients.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's like, is that called countertransference?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got some
Yeah.
horror stories.
Yeah. I imagine.
Yeah.
Shauna adds that recently there's been a lot of talk about Native men not being able to have feelings and to be strong, causing them to be unable to express feelings in a healthy way. Yeah, Shauna, I think that's a great point. And Native Indigenous men, whether we're talking about Alaska Native, American Indian, Native Hawaiian, I think that there's a difference there as well, just in the unique sense of being directly connected to the land in which you're still a part of. And I've been reading a lot about the American Indian Wars, and a big way that they were one of the ways that they were able to essentially break the American Indian during those late 1800 American Indian Wars was, the the idea of the man and the warrior. They were seen as the hunters and the protectors of the tribe, and they had started from a very early age with purpose for those kind of things. And different tribes and different cultures can be different, but usually there's an underlying similar theme there. And then you put them on a force them to give up. They killed a lot of the game, killed all the buffalo for some of them, but forced them to move on to reservations where they no longer had that sense of positive masculinity, where they used, their abilities as a man to, like I said, to gather, to provide for the tribe, to provide for the people, to protect them when necessary, and a lack of purpose there. And I think you still see the remnants of that in today's world. And where do you find your purpose? I think we all, no matter what background you have, we all struggle with that to some degree. But again, for the native peoples of this land, it's a little bit different because there's a direct lineage to here in a way that things were before. And so I would be curious to know is how did they balance what we're talking about, masculine and femininity? How did they balance that in the old days before colonization, before Europeans and things like that? What was the ideas and way lenses and philosophies around that, and I need to learn more about it, but that might help us understand what the today's youth are going for. We have a guy named or there's a guy named Harold Napoleon wrote a book called New York, The Way of the Human Being, and he describes Alaskan natives as in a spirit having a generational gap from all the kids that were sent to boarding school and the parents didn't learn how to parent and they didn't know how to parent their own children traditionally and so on. And then you have the different things pulling at them, like, say like MTV or the internet, depending on what area you're in. You have, a lot of people trying to pull back to the traditional culture. You might have Christianity up in there as well, trying to pull different ways. And think about how much confusing that might be to an indigenous youth, growing up in the world and how it might be confusing and and things like that. And so I'd say go back to the same thing that we need more space for people to be themselves, more opportunities for that. What do you think, Mark?
No, I agree. I agree. I think it's important to have that space. There's a lot about indigenous culture that I'm not aware of, so I don't feel comfortable responding to that, to what the individual said. But I do know when it comes to feelings, one thing that has helped me and other brothers I know is to do a feelings journal. And for 15 minutes, and you can use your phone if you have one, or you can get a piece of paper and just write down whatever feelings comes to your mind. I feel embarrassed, I feel sad, I feel uncomfortable, I feel grateful, I feel blessed, I feel excited, I feel depressed. Whatever feelings come, just put it on paper for 15 minutes and then stop and see what happens. See what happens to the body, the trauma in the body. See, is there any like heaviness lifted? Do you feel lighter? Do you feel more comfortable? Or do you even feel even more distressed? I don't know. Everybody's experience is different, but a feelings journal for 15 minutes to me has really been a game changer. So maybe that's something you may want to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Timmy adds, says, I think there's a lot to unpack around the male masculine competitive archetypes and potential incompatibility with genuine self love. Many of us were trained to work harder and do better, not that we were inherently worth loving just as we are, messes and all. And yeah, that's a very good reflection, Timmy. Are we deserving of love just exactly as we are, without any strings attached, without any conditions, without any other things we have to achieve? I struggle with that even today, Mark. Like, I'm thinking I don't have my PhD yet. Once I get that, people will love me in a different way. And maybe I don't use those exact words, but it's the gist of it. And that's a dangerous game because it would be never enough. You know what I mean? And that's why I criticize a lot of the so-called super wealthy people in America and beyond. It's like if I'm worried about money making $50,000 a year and you worried about money with $5 billion, then there's really nowhere to go because we're just going to be worried about money, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
And my older sister who she's heavy into stocks and bonds and money markets and investing. I was coming home from Chicago a couple months ago, and it was like 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm super tired, and she was talking about all this stuff that I don't know anything about. And I said to my sister, it's too early to talk about money. It's 8 o'clock in the oh, it's never too early to talk about money. I could talk money all day. I'm like, well, I can't. But that's her world. That's where she's at. I love my sister, but we have different values. And
Yeah.
I'm not right. She's not wrong. She's not right. I'm not wrong. We just have different values and our focus is different, and that's okay. But I don't want to talk about money at 8 o'clock in the morning.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah. Well, anything else on your mind, Mark, before we get wrapping up? We've been talking for 90 minutes now.
No, no, I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate this. I love your spirit, and I'm glad that Katie came on board. That was a pleasant surprise. And I'm hoping that whoever listens finds this conversation to be useful and valuable. And maybe we plant some seeds or raise their awareness or spark some dialogue, or maybe they disagreed or they have a different opinion or whatever. Just I want to thank people who chime in today and will listen in days to come. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, first of all, thanks to Brother KD for tuning in and blessing us with his presence for a little bit. And thanks for folks in the audience. We've got David, Rowan, Renee, Timmy, Star. I think Alice was in there earlier, Shauna. Sorry if I missed anybody, but I really appreciate you all. The podcast episodes, these conversations are so much better when you all contribute and make us think about things in a different way and contribute your own knowledge and wisdom and experience. So I really appreciate you. And big, big thank you to you, Mark. Mahalo from Hawaii. The first time that I met you, which was in a similar vein with Alicia here. You know, you never know what you're going to get when you meet somebody new and you have a conversation that's live or online or recorded or things like that. But you are definitely one of the ones that really touched my heart and continue to touch my heart. And it's not any one specific thing that you say or that you do. It's the person that you are, Mark, the person that you put yourself out there, the way you interact with me, the way you show love to me and to my wife, and the mutual connections that we have. You just fill up my heart. And I'm so glad that the world includes someone like you, Mark. You make the world a better place. And if more of us were, like you, espousing love, that were reflective and critical about things, and, were willing to be their authentic selves and share their truth. And if there were more people like you, then more of us would be liberated ourselves and be free to do that in our own worlds. And so keep doing what you're doing, Mark. I'm
Thank you,
really looking
H. That
forward.
that was very kind. I appreciate that, man. That meant a lot.
Mm. All right, Mark. Well, I look forward to hearing about the upcoming documentary you got coming out. Have a
Yeah,
blessed.
yeah. And thank you to Star and Timmy and Rowan and David. I just saw their names up on the screen.
Yeah, yeah. Big mahalo. Thank you. All right,
Yeah.
Mark. Have a great
Okay,
day.
man. All right. Enjoy
All
the
right.
rest of your day.
Yeah, peace.